Okay, welcome back. Thank you all for sticking around. We've got one last plenary session to go over some very important information around Title IX. This is something that everybody should be aware of, but maybe we're not super aware of. So I'm really grateful for Sandy Hodgen and Jennifer Mayhew for joining us to be able to present on this. These are our campus experts, and they are going to give us lots of good information. Just to set you all up, this is the last push before we can have a lunch break and get going to the collaborative conversations. But I am really happy that you're here and that we have our experts to be able to give some crucial content. So I will turn it over to you both now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Sandra Hodgen. You can all call me Sandy. And I am the Assistant Director for Title IX Compliance and Programs here at CSU. To give a little bit of background, I have a dual PhD in political science and in education, primarily public policy and education, where my research expertise is in Title IX policies and procedures, as well as prevention education of sexual violence on the national and international systems.
I am Jennifer Mayhew. I'm the Assistant Director for Complaints and Disabilities in the Office of Equal Opportunity. I do have a JD. I practiced as a litigator for 7 years in Chicago before moving out here to Colorado, where I worked for a couple of years strictly in workplace investigations, and now I'm in the Office of Equal Opportunity. Do know my role here on campus is strictly administrative. I'm not acting in any legal capacity in this role, but having that background certainly helps with understanding our policies, interpreting our policies, and providing guidance as it relates to compliance across the university.
To start, thank you all for being here at our plenary session. Things to know about Title IX. Is it connected? So to start, I always like to look at what the Title IX Education Amendment actually says. So I'm going to go ahead and read through exactly what it states. And it reads, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." In other words, Title IX really is looking at protecting all individuals from sexual discrimination within all types of institutions that are federally funded. And when I say federally funded institutions, that includes K through 12 campuses, as well as two-year community colleges and four-year universities that are federally funded. So what issues does Title IX include? And I'd like for all of you to take about 15 to 20 seconds and just kind of talk with your table and discuss or just mention the issues that you feel Title IX includes. So again, just 15 to 20 seconds, just kind of talk amongst yourselves about what do you feel Title IX issues include. Okay. So I hope that was a really insightful moment where some of you may have thought of one thing and maybe have noticed somebody else thought of something different that you hadn't really thought of. And so I'm going to go through kind of an exhaustive list of what Title IX really does cover. First and foremost, it prohibits sex discrimination. And sexual discrimination includes sexual assault, sexual harassment, hazing, interpersonal violence, which includes dating and domestic violence, pregnancy or parental status inequities, and athletics inequities. How many of you were able to guess all of them? Okay. So I'm going to talk about the history of Title IX. That way we really understand why Title IX came to be and why it is important for all of us today. It really started with a person named Bernice Sandler, and I love talking about her because she is considered the godmother of Title IX. She passed away in January of this year, but she left a really great legacy because Bernice Sandler was the original individual that wrote out the actual bill with her local congressman for Title IX. Bernice Sandler was a faculty member at a university, and she kept applying for promotions. She had her PhD, and she kept getting rejected. And she was just not getting full-time tenured positions, and yet she was watching her counterparts, these male professors, being promoted up, and yet she, in many ways, was more experienced and felt she was better qualified. And when she started to question why she was not being promoted, the response came back that it was because she was a female. Because she was a woman, and they were starting to tell her she should be at home, having children, she should not be worried about getting promotions within academia. And also they were telling her that she should stop applying for just any type of promotion within the university. So she connected with other faculty members, and together they went to go look for their congressman in order to figure out how can we change this. Because in many ways, this was considered gender discrimination and sexual harassment, especially because she was also being told, you're just too loud, you're too opinionated. You should not be applying for these positions, and you're not going to get them. So together, with their congressmen, eventually their bill became Title IX, as we know it today, the 1972 Education Amendment. And in 1972, this was really great. However, one thing happened. Everyone started recognizing Title IX, but they were looking at it as an athletics inequity bill. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that happened, but if you were to look at court cases, at what lawyers were discussing and arguing, what academics were focusing in on, it was really only on athletics. They were forgetting that sexual discrimination meant much more than just athletics. And it would take until the 90s, Supreme Court decisions, to change that. Within Supreme Court decisions that started in the 90s, they started looking at, we need to expand and redefine so that the public recognizes what sexual discrimination really means. And 3 specific areas that the Supreme Court decisions focused in on really identified what sexual discrimination included. And those 3 segments were, first, that sexual discrimination prohibits student-to-student sexual discrimination, that it also prohibits authority figure to student sexual discrimination, and it also prohibits institutional indifference to reports of sexual discrimination on campuses. And so those 3 specific areas were decisions from the Supreme Court. Following that, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights released guidance letters based on the Supreme Court decisions. And in 1997, the Sexual Harassment Guidance Letter was first released. And it was released to educate and provide responsibility to institutions to identify and understand what they were responsible for, based on the Supreme Court decisions. In 2001, a revised version of the 1997 guidance letter was released. And it's actually called the Sexual Harassment Revised Guidance Letter. And it is what is in place today, which is what all institutions really follow today. In this specific guidance letter, they established 3 specifics that institutions need to cover. And those include, first, that all institutions need to be providing and implementing prevention education programming to all constituents. Second, that the institutions also need to adopt policies and procedures for Title IX. And third, that institutions need to designate a Title IX coordinator. So altogether, this is really kind of, in a nutshell, the history of Title IX and how it came to be as how we understand it today. Because today, the regulation that really oversees all the institutions is the 2001 guidance letter. Since the 2001 guidance letter, there's been a lot of action within Title IX. The Obama administration released several Dear Colleague letters, several guidance letters, which were all replaced, rescinded by the Trump administration. So currently, like I described, the 2001 guidance letter is what's in place right now, and which is what is important to all of us today. The new proposed regulations were released in November of 2018, and there's been a lot of argument, a lot of discussion about them, but they really do not have anything to do with Title IX at the moment because it really is in heavy debate, and we do not know what's going to happen. So we cannot assume to follow anything from the proposed regulations at the moment. In preparing for today, I wanted to pull just a little bit of research for all of us to kind of keep in mind about Title IX. And the first that I thought of was the fact that I want to really remind everyone that actions, policies, and procedures are not culturally neutral in institutions. They're just not. On a spectrum, you can look at institutions being either proactive all the way to being reactive. And you can really analyze institutions and think of it that way. And then in a lot of ways, we can then feel we are empowered, and we should feel empowered, to influence the culture of institutions, especially in how we are looking at Title IX. Another research aspect that I felt was really important to discuss and mention is the fact that less than 10% of students report to school administrators and/or to the police when they are a victim of sexual misconduct or sexual violence. And the last one is in regards to all of us. All of us are what I would consider informal supports when you have students that you might know, friends, colleagues, family members, informal supports that mean so much in the Title IX world. Because as this states up here, when individuals are victimized, when survivors need help, usually they're going to informal supports first before they're going to the police, before they're going to school administrators, and even sometimes before they go to advocacy groups. They tend to go more to informal supports. And so all the information that we're going to share with you guys today is so important for all of us to really take in and understand for the situations where individuals may come to you, and you can help provide some sort of support, offer resources, information that they may need. And also because informal supports, we can all help to increase that number of reporting percentages for people to get the help that they need. And also we can influence the actions, policies, and procedures of campuses by all of us understanding more of the issues of Title IX and what Title IX actually does. So in talking about actions and policies and procedures, and I mentioned campuses are not culturally neutral, I developed and put together this research to identify a lot of the non-compliance liability that institutions have been sued for because of where they stand on topics of Title IX. And so you can see here, starting with the year 2006 down to 2017, there are several examples of institutions and how much they lost in lawsuits. To the right, I have themes here of overall themes of what they did or did not do to help support individuals on their campuses. And so I'm going to go through the themes pretty briefly. And please keep in mind that these institutions may have been guilty of one, two, or all of these specific themes. So some of these institutions demonstrated deliberate indifference to assault reports, meaning when someone came forward and reported something took place, they were basically ignored and no steps were taken to help them or to alleviate the situation. Some of these campuses ignored suspected child abuse complaints or reports. Specifically, the Los Angeles Unified School District, there was decades where parents and teachers went and told administrators, we think something's wrong, we think something's going on, something's going on with our children, their behavior's changing, and administrators just ignored it. And so for decades, they had students that were just abused. And so you can see that the amount that they paid out was substantial because of that. Other campuses, some of them may have mishandled investigations or did no investigation. Others had administrations that just did no action at all. Others demonstrated Title IX inequity to involved parties, meaning if you had an individual come forward and say something took place, I'm a survivor, I'm a victim, and you have the individual that's being accused and the institution is treating them not the same but just differently, giving preferential treatment to one or the other. Some of these campuses mishandled adjudication, whether through appeals, hearings, sanctions. Some of these campuses ignored warnings to change policy. So for example, University of Colorado in 2006, they had years of warnings to change their policies and procedures, and they completely ignored it. Some institutions did not advise resources or options to individuals that came forward and needed help and guidance. And some of these institutions, one specifically, Feather River Community College, third from the bottom, mishandled reports from responsible employees. In the Feather River Community College situation, there were faculty and staff that came forward and told administrators that they had suspicion and concerns of other employees at the university. The university ignored it and instead retaliated against the faculty and staff members. So they got together and they found the campus liable. So now, with all of that in mind, I'd like for us all just to take a moment, close your eyes if you feel comfortable, just take a moment and really think about this question. Is Title IX related to the topic of rape culture? And while you're thinking about that, think about the Me Too movement. Think about Bernice Sandler, what she went through. Think about current situations like the women's soccer team that's demanding equal pay. And so the answer is yes. Of course, right? But it's not always obvious to a lot of people. Title IX is definitely related to all types of gender inequities. And Title IX is definitely related to all types of gender inequities within rape culture. And to define rape culture, I'll just read this very quickly. It's described as a society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual assault and abuse, both of which, sexual assault and abuse, are part of sex discrimination. So why is Title IX important for all of us? I mean, besides the ethical, the moral, the compliance point, it's important for all of us because as employees, as supervisors, as employers, it really is important for us to understand it when we work with students, when we work with our colleagues, and also because it's a direct connection to Title VII. Under human resources, if you were to really look at Title IX and Title VII side by side, there's a lot of an overlap. So if you understand Title IX, it really helps you to understand Title VII, the protections you have as an employee. Also, it's important as a parent, as an uncle, aunt, guardian, because your nephews, your nieces, your children are all within the K through 12 school system, which, like I said earlier, is also under Title IX. So understanding those rights is important for your children and for what you can provide them if they ever need help or understanding what their rights are. And also as a coworker, friend, family member. I mentioned earlier about informal supports. Many times people will go to you because you're their friend, you're their neighbor. Or you have your children's parent come to you, I don't know what to do. these informal supports, by understanding Title IX, you are more aware and empowered to provide the information that individuals may not have or know or understand. And so the second half of our presentation, Jennifer's going to come up and talk about more specifics on what exactly the inappropriate behaviors are. My portion was really to talk about the generalities of why Title IX is so important and the history of it. And so I hope that as you continue to listen to our presentation, that I want you to really focus in on what are those inappropriate behaviors and what do you do to report. Pay attention to where the campus policies are located. And when you locate them, actually read them. Look to see what you do and do not understand. And if you don't understand something, really try to understand it. And lastly, we're going to discuss the resources that are available on and off campus for both employees and students. And so I really ask that everyone really focus in on that, and the handouts on the middle of your tables provide you that as well, so you can walk away with that. Thanks.
So as Sandy mentioned, there is some overlap between Title IX and Title VII. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is what made sexual harassment, sex discrimination, other protected status discrimination, harassment illegal in the workplace. Title IX is specific to sex discrimination in federally funded education programs. So you can see why at a university there's talk about both. Well, one of the reasons that we felt it was so important to do this particular program and for Sandy to present as it relates to some of the generalities is looking at the news, looking at how things have been reported over time. Sometimes it appears that there might be a misconception that Title IX is just about sexual assault, and that's not the case. And responsible employee reporting, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is not just specific to sexual assault. Sexual assault is a type of sexual harassment which falls under sex discrimination under the big umbrella of discrimination. Okay? So, with that in mind, it's important to have a basic understanding of the definitions of discrimination and sexual harassment. I'm not going to go in depth like I do in my other live training specific to these topics, but I just want to give you a baseline of the definition. And these definitions that I'm going to speak to you about, they are contained within our combined policy, which is our discrimination, harassment, sexual misconduct, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and retaliation policy. Mouthful. No acronym, which astounds me at the university. Everything else has an acronym. So I refer to it as the combined policy. All right? Discrimination is exclusion from participation in, denied the benefits of, treated differently than others, or otherwise adversely affected in a term or condition of employment, education, living environment, or university program or activity. When applied to sex discrimination, that is when that behavior is motivated by one's actual or perceived sex or gender. Here on campus, we protect gender identity, gender expression, gender and sex, meaning sex at birth, and also in the realm of sexual harassment, sexual-based behavior. Okay? So what are some examples of discrimination? Because it is important for you to be able to recognize certain types of behaviors that fall under this umbrella so that it can be reported. When you witness this type of behavior, individuals come to you with concerns of this type of behavior. So just some basic examples. The professor only offers extra credit to male-identified students. Fewer athletic scholarship dollars offered to women's sports compared to men's sports, and Sandy spoke to inequities within athletics. Only graduate students and employees who identify as women are asked for input on parental leave. What about employees and graduate students who identify as male or trans or non-binary? They should be included in input as it relates to parental leave as well, right? So looking at where people could be treated differently because of their actual or perceived sex or gender. Sexual harassment. So I like to say there are generally two key elements to sexual harassment, to that definition. It is going to be conduct that is sexual in nature or directed at someone because of gender. If it's not sexual in nature or gender behavior, it is not going to be sexual harassment. Okay? Could be some other type of prohibited, protected, protected status, discrimination, harassment, but it won't be sex harassment. And it is conduct that is unwelcome, meaning uninvited, unwelcome to the person complaining about that behavior. Okay? So that is, in essence, the definition of sexual harassment. Right. I do highly encourage you to please review our combined policy because it does speak more in depth to some of these definitions. It speaks to some different types of behaviors that can fall under these definitions. As it relates to sexual harassment, sexual ridicule, frequent jokes about sex or gender, repeatedly asking a person out for dates. Okay? Many individuals don't realize, they think, oh, well, I'm just being persistent. No. If someone is interested in a coworker or another student and they ask that individual out, what we recommend, if you get anything other than a yes or I can't that date, how about this alternative date? Don't ask again, right? That's an indication that if you're getting excuses, put off, that's an indication that that behavior is unwelcome, okay? Attempted or actual sexual assault. I want to talk about stereotyping based on actual or perceived gender. So this has actually been illegal under sexual harassment since 1988. There is a Supreme Court case. Now, it was decided under Title VII, but there is a Supreme Court case where there was a woman employee at this big famous accounting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and she was one of the top performing employees. She outperformed her male colleagues, brought in millions of dollars to this institution, and she was up for partner. So the partners gathered because they have to vote to decide whether or not she's going to be partner. And it's a group of male individuals, and they debated, and they discussed, and they say, oh, wow, she really does bring a lot of money in. Yeah, she's a really good employee, but we're not going to make her partner this year. And her supervisor, who was a partner and part of those deliberations, decided he was going to share with his employee information that he learned in that discussion to help her understand what she could do in order to make partner the next time she was eligible. So, out of the kindness of his heart, he went up to her and he says, you know what you could really do if you want to be partner? Walk more femininely, wear skirts more often, wear makeup, get your hair done, and go to charm school because you're a little rough around the edges. And the Supreme Court said that is gender stereotyping. That is illegal sex harassment. Think about that when we're working with our trans and non-binary students and employees across campus, right? So this is not a new topic. Certainly it is in the news, rightfully so, much more frequently as people are gaining education awareness with respect to the barriers, the challenges, the attitudes that trans and non-binary individuals face, right? In addition to women. I mentioned our combined policy. How many of you have read the combined policy in all 17,000 pages, right? It's long, not gonna lie. It is definitely a long read, but it's important for you to read that policy because it does speak to other behaviors here on campus that are prohibited. It also speaks to your responsibilities as employees under Title IX. It speaks to retaliation, which Sandy mentioned was a concern in some of those rulings as it related to some other institutions. Right? So it's important for you to be familiar with these definitions. And so I want you to know where you can find this policy. You can find it on the OEO website. You can find it on the website for Support and Safety Assessment Title IX programs. It is appended to the Faculty Administrative Professional Manual. You can also find it in the University Policy Library. These are all places where you can find copies of this. And I know that there are additional ones out there. These are just some of the ones that I tend to hit up in the work that I do. So please, please find the policy, read the policy, have copies of the policy. You can even come to OEO, I hand out hard copies of the policy. But it is important to be familiar with it, to understand some definitions, and to be able to even provide guidance to coworkers or students that you may work with, help them understand where they can find the policy, okay? So I want to talk a little bit about OEO procedures, because I think it's really important for all of you, especially in your roles as responsible employees, to understand a little bit about what the options are through OEO. And the reason I want you to be familiar with that is because, as Sandy mentioned, often a student or even a coworker is gonna go to you as a coworker or as an informal support, right? A mentor even. And so if you have a little bit of information about what the OEO process looks like, you can demystify that process for them, right? I don't expect you to be able to share in detail every step of how things work, but give them a sense of what they might expect. so that a Title IX report can be made, right? So OEO, we offer two different complaint processes. We have an informal complaint process. We have a formal complaint process. They're both considered official complaints, okay? The difference, informal is not about determining whether there has been a violation of the university's policy, okay? Instead, it's more about trying to reach a mutually agreeable resolution between the parties. Now, that does not necessarily mean everybody sits at the same table and hashes it out. That does not necessarily mean mediation. Yes, those are processes that could be used within that informal process. Those are different types of conflict resolution strategies. But it doesn't mean that's the way that it happens. You know, often I'm engaging in shuttle diplomacy going back and forth between the parties. But under the informal, I speak with the parties individually to understand their perspectives. Sometimes I'm gathering additional information from other individuals with firsthand knowledge so that I am in a position to be armed with enough information to try to broker that agreement, okay? And do know, even though I'm not reaching a conclusion of whether policy has been violated, I am certainly being mindful and keeping an eye out of the behavior that we are working with and how that works within the policy, okay? Now, in terms of a resolution, that can look like a lot of things as long as the parties agree. And this informal process can be a very powerful tool. Resolutions have spanned from education and awareness to an individual regarding how their behavior is concerning with respect to policy and how it's impacted the complaining party. It's been agreements to have additional training with yours truly or possibly online. We've had individuals accept discipline as a result of that process. We have had individuals agree to leave the institution under that process. So it can be very powerful. It's not always great in every situation, but it is an option for individuals, right? And I will always speak to the informal and formal process in any meeting with someone so that they know what options exist. The formal process is strictly about determining whether there is a violation of that combined policy, right? And that formal process is an investigation, okay? It is a formal process. The parties have available to them what we call due process rights, equal opportunity to be heard, equal opportunity to know the issues on the table, right? Following the investigation, I create a report. I use what's called the preponderance of the evidence standard, which many of you may have heard of. If you're not familiar with it, it is often described as more likely than not, 50.01% to 49%. So it's the preponderance of the evidence standard is used in all of the investigations in OEO. And then once I have a report, it is provided to all of the parties. Okay, so they get an opportunity to see the information that I gathered, the information that I relied on, how I reached my conclusions, and all the individuals that I spoke with. Though we do take precautions to the extent we can to maintain the confidentiality of who specifically shared what within the process of within that report. What both processes have available to them, confidentiality, right? OEO maintains confidentiality on a strict need-to-know basis. We are not 100% confidential, but on a strict need-to-know basis. We keep that net as tight as possible. If someone is to share with me sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, stalking, I still have to report that to certain other administrators so they can carry out their legal obligations, okay? And retaliation. Both processes protect the parties and witnesses from retaliation, which is adverse action taken against someone because they engaged in that protected activity, okay? All right, you've heard me mention responsible employee, right? That means all of you are volunteers on campus, student employees. If you witness, if you learn of possible sex-based discrimination or harassment, particularly when it is involving a student, you are required to report it within 24 hours to our Title IX coordinator. It can also be reported to me. I'm Deputy Title IX Coordinator for Employment, and our two offices do communicate to determine which office ultimately takes the lead. In general, now there are some specific situations where this is not the case, but in general, if the person accused of the behavior is a student, it goes through the Office of Title IX Programs. If the person accused of the behavior is an employee, a vendor, a visitor to campus, a community member, that comes through OEO, okay? Why do you need to report? Students come to you, they want your confidence, they're looking for guidance. You need to report because our students, our employees are impacted by this behavior, and if we don't know about it, we can't address it. So it's very important because it's the right thing to do to help us understand what's happening so that appropriate steps can be taken. I forgot to mention this under the procedures. I do want to make you aware there are some situations where the university must initiate an investigation because of the nature of the behavior, and that happens without an official complaint. There are occasions where that has to happen because the nature of the behavior is so significant, so severe. That said, when I meet with an individual, I will still speak to these different options because I don't want to usurp an individual's agency. I have had individuals come in cases where we would have initiated an investigation and they wish to file an official complaint, wanted to be named complaining parties. Okay? And sometimes if we jump in without giving some options and sharing some different ways that behavior can be addressed, we can actually do more harm than good. But there are occasions where that does have to happen. Okay? So what do you do when a student comes to you looking for advice, looking for guidance on how to handle a situation? And you know you can't necessarily keep whatever they're about to share with you confidential. Okay? If a student comes to you and you think that student is about to go down that road of something that might be about sex discrimination, sex harassment, they're asking you for confidentiality, what we suggest is you can politely interrupt, okay? Because you don't want them to get too far down the road and think you're going to be able to keep it confidential, and let that individual know that because of your role here at the institution, because you are a responsible employee, there are some things you cannot keep confidential, okay? We ask that you still encourage them to share. Let them know, I want to hear what you have to say because you do, right? But give them that opportunity to decide whether they want to continue with that conversation, and share resources. Share the resources on campus that are exempt from responsible employee reporting, that are 100% confidential. And we're going to share a couple slides with you. There's a handout that speaks to the resources. But confidential, 100% confidential resources include the victim advocates and the victim assistance team and the Women, Gender, and Advocacy Center, the counselors and the counseling center, the medical providers and the Women's Center with the health network. On the employee side, the employee assistance program, all of those providers are off campus, and so that is going to be confidential. There's also, when we ultimately fill the position, the ombuds is 100% confidential as well. Okay? And demystify the process. Let someone know, by reporting this, that doesn't necessarily mean an investigation is going to start right away. Gather some information, understand the options, okay? Help them understand. We want to involve individuals in the process. We want them to have an opportunity to participate in choosing how things are potentially going to be addressed, okay? And offer support. As Sandy mentioned, we're all informal supports for individuals, okay? You can offer to be a support person and go with them to a meeting, to meet with me. Anyone who, meets with me can bring a support person with them, and it doesn't matter who that person is, right? Mm-hmm. And you can be that individual. So we only have a few more minutes. I want to talk again about employee resources. As I mentioned, the confidential on-campus supports for employees will be the Office of the Ombudsman, also the Employee Assistance Program. And Jan Pierce is the coordinator of the Employee Assistance Program, can speak to you about how that works. Office of Equal Opportunity, strict need-to-know basis. Non-confidential support, student case management, tell someone employee assistance program is confidential. Sexual assault victim advocate center, SAVA, that is off campus in the community, is going to be another 100% confidential support because they are not part of the university. They are not required to report anything under Title IX to us. So these are several different options. Additionally, no, CSU PD and Fort Collins Police Department are options, particularly if there is physical touching involved. Please, please share the CSU PD and Fort Collins PD with the individual as resources and options. Okay, they are not confidential, but they are resources.
Mm-hmm. And we provided a handout on all the tables so you can take these resources home with you and keep them in your offices. The next slide, our last slide, are the student resources. Confidential support on campus includes CSU Health and Medical Center counseling services, women's care services at CSU Health Network, and the Women and Gender Advocacy Center's Victim Assistance Team. Confidential supports off campus include SAVA, Crossroads, and RAIN, the National Victim Center. And non-confidential support includes CSU Police Department, Fort Collins Police Department, Student Case Management, and Tell Someone. Thank you all for being here with us today.
Yeah, false.
Yes. Thank you so much. I have one question. Would you mind going back to your discrimination slide, please?
Definition?
Yes. So, yeah.
Of those examples?
Or that one,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So earlier we were talking about affinity spaces and the need for affinity
yes.
spaces, and then sometimes our programs are available with specific audiences in mind. So could you give the room some information and guidance on how to be able to provide appropriate and supportive programming while not infringing on any kind of discrimination policy?
Yeah, and that's a challenge, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention this earlier. So we cannot exclude individuals from programming on campus for any protected status reason. Okay, so a lot of organizations want to provide programming with target audiences. Absolutely, programming can target an audience in its description, where it's advertised. However, individuals cannot be excluded. All right, and so ways for that to happen. When you're writing the description so that it appeals to the particular target audience, you're not excluding individuals, but you're indicating this is what we're going to be discussing. These are the topics that we're going to be covering in this program, right? And then if individuals come and they're not the target audience, you still need to allow them to be present. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean individuals get to take over the presentation or be disruptive, right? If that is what someone is doing, if they're being disruptive, and this would be the case of anybody in any program, if they are being disruptive, if they are trying to take over the programming, at that point, yes, they can be asked to leave, because they're not being asked to leave because of any protected status reasons, such as gender, race, ethnicity. They're being asked to leave because they're being disruptive. They're not being respectful. They're not allowing the program to move forward the way that the program needs to move forward. Okay, so that is a way to address it. Now, I also am aware that there are some concerns about individuals not being willing to share in spaces where some other individuals might be present. You can set some ground rules if there's planning to be kind of a discussion regarding respect, allowing people to finish what they're about to say before the next person speaks, right? You can also speak to, if you're not comfortable sharing this particular space, offer up to be a support and meet with them confidentially afterwards so that you can discuss whatever they might not wish to share for whatever reason within that larger space, okay? But it is important not to exclude. And we've had situations in the past with private organizations, but they've been sponsored by university departments. And so when we find out that they're being advertised for, say, women only, for example, because of the university sponsorship it taking place here on campus, that brings them within our policies, and we would need to have that conversation about cannot exclude. So do know that that's something that, when it comes to our attention, we also work with, and there are ways to still engage in that programming for your target audience.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you all. Please join me in thanking Jennifer and Sandy once more for their presentation.